today.
Okay, thank you so much, Rilis. Now, Janelle, the Nevis Historical and Conservation Society. Tell us a little bit about, about it.
Sure. The Nevis Historical and Conservation Society, called the NHCS for short, so that we don't have to say the long name all the time, is basically a sister organization to the St. Christopher National Trust. We do in Nevis what the National Trust does for St. Kitts. So we are concerned with the protection, preservation, and promotion of our culture, history, and just natural heritage. So that we work a lot along those lines. We also manage 3 small museums. One is currently under construction, so we have the Museum of Nevis History along with the Hamilton Museum, as well as the soon-to-be-developed Nevis Maritime Museum, which will also house the Nelson Collection. We also manage a number of historical sites, including Cottle Church and the Jewish Cemetery, and work closely with the government to protect and preserve sites that are under their control as well.
And Mr. Hanley, the Brimstone Hill Fortress National Park Society.
Well, thank you, Mr. Williams. The Brimstone Hill Fortress National Park Society is an NGO, and we are charged with the job of managing the Brimstone Hill Fortress National Park. It was created as a national park in 1985, which gave it the distinction of being protected by the state. In addition, we have the very important distinction of being inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. That is fairly significant because World Heritage Sites are very exclusively selected as having what is referred to as outstanding universal value. That gives an idea of the importance of Brimstone Hill in the context of the world history, and we are proud to be the managers of that particular national patrimony. Most Kittitians, I would imagine, have visited Brimstone Hill, and so they know what it's about, so I don't have to go into too much detail about it. And of course, if you have not yet visited Brimstone Hill, we therefore want to encourage you to make sure that you secure a visit as soon as possible. For local persons, it's only 10 EC dollars. You spend more than that to buy breakfast sometimes. And you get a very detailed and exciting tour of Brimstone Hill. In fact, as a local, I would encourage you not to come up there for an hour, not to come up there for 2 hours. Come up there for at least a half a day. And you'll also discover that even if you come for half a day, that you'll still not cover all there is to cover at Brimstone Hill. It is so extensive. 45 acres of historical monuments, and therefore it takes a while. And also, it will take a little energy. So pack a picnic basket. We allow people to come and picnic. We have picnic benches and so on. Pack a picnic basket. If you want to have a small tent, you can get permission before you come to pitch a small tent and have a group. And there's special group rates. You can get half of that admission fee for group rates. So we encourage everyone to come. Make use of your local historical sites. The tourists and so on and the visitors that come here, enjoy them, and so must you.
And just 2 weeks ago, I had in my program officials from UNESCO, of course, and they were discussing the importance of the preservation of historical sites, and some of these sites, of course, that have been recognized by UNESCO as World Heritage Sites. And even though you are NGOs, as all of you indicated, nonetheless, you work very closely with government, extremely closely with the government in carrying out, for example, culture, the importance of the preservation of culture and history and all of that. Very important. But let's get to the meat of the matter. Museums, and today is International Museum Day. Now, what is the objective of this day, Willis? International Museum Day. We have so many museums all over the world.
We need to have a lot more here in St. Kitts.
Yeah.
So the objective today is to promote the museum and its goal and its function and its objectives within the context of our culture, and to share what is in the museum, especially or specifically with the locals. We have a lot of people who visit St. Kitts, as Mr. Hanley pointed out, and they appreciate what we have. Our locals also need to do that. So today we took the opportunity to invite a lot of the schools to come by and to come and to see what we have in the museum. So the real function of a museum from the National Trust perspective is education, awareness, the preservation of our history, and the promotion of it. So that today is what we do. And the National Museum of St. Kitts promotes the history of St. Kitts. But throughout the years, we have interspersed that with what we call special exhibits. We've mounted exhibition that tells a specific story or highlight a specific activity or an event that took place. And so that is one of the ways we also, use, because the permanent exhibit at the National Museum stays there. If you come today, you see the same thing, you come tomorrow. But every so often, we'll mount a special exhibition. So if you come again the next month, you will see something special. There will be something that is targeting a particular topic, interest, event, or so forth, and we call those special exhibits. Currently now, we have 3 special exhibits in the museum. And I think a lot of persons would have realized that we have begun some restoration work on the building. And what we have done is that we have taken down our permanent national exhibit because we want to make it more modern, more interactive, more interesting to the targeted audiences that we target. So we've taken it down to revamp it, and so hopefully by the time we finish restoring the building, once you enter, you'll see a new, modern exhibition of the history of St. Kitts and Nevis. But today, it's really about us sharing the history of St. Kitts, educating our people, and to have them appreciate what we have. And trust me, people don't come up there, but when they do, they're floored by what's there.
Mm-hmm. Now, Janelle, the museums play a great role in the development of people, development, of course, of culture, the development of countries on a whole. And part of that development has to do with the preservation or the conservation of our past. Why conserve and preserve our past? Isn't the past in the past?
If the past was in the past, we wouldn't have many of the aspects that we have in our current society. It's important to preserve the past so that we can learn from and build on what our ancestors have already worked towards. So if everyone begins from square one, it would make for a very lacking society. And so one of the aspects of our museum is to showcase where we came from to where we are currently. So if you visit the Museum of Nevis History, for example, you would see a chronological timeline showcasing prehistoric times towards modern-day Nevis, and that is next to what was also happening globally at the time. So what was happening in Europe, what was happening in Africa. So it's not just limited per se to Nevisian history, but to the international history that would have been impacting us locally at the time. And then you transition throughout the timeline, you get to enslavement and the sugar industry, which was a major aspect of our history, and you transition to now our modern day culture, our musical instruments, the masquerade, the dialect that we speak. So if you visit our museums, you'll get a taste of all of those aspects. And while we're celebrating International Museums Day, to encourage locals and residents to visit, it's free of charge for this entire week for locals and residents. So come visit the Museum of Nevis History, see what there is to offer, learn some of your own history, and just, delve into the culture.
Right, so you're saying here that it is a journey from the people that came, you're talking about colonialism, you're talking about slavery, movements towards independence, where we are now, and so on. So it's a whole journey, and so therefore our history is not just about the past, but how the past has opened our minds to new ideas and so on. Mr. Hanley, Brimstone Hill.
Let me first say that, just to extend what you said there, there's a saying that says, for us to chart our way forward, we must know where we're coming from. And that is the importance of history.
That's the importance of history. Of course, Brimstone Hill. Sometimes the history, of course, is not very pretty. We know in terms of the cruelty of, for example, slavery, working on the sugar plantations. We are now hearing calls for reparations. Some people are saying it was blood money that, of course, went into the development of the European countries and all of that. We look at Brimstone Hill, and even though now the monument is there, so great and so grand for everybody to see, I mean, the history is not so pretty at all in terms of how it was built and all of that. So tell us a little bit in terms of your perspective on...
Go ahead.
Yes.
Yes, well, as you know, Brimstone Hill was constructed under the aegis of the British. But they weren't the ones who really did the physical work. The physical work was done by the Africans, the enslaved Africans. And I would like the public to know that I don't say African slaves. Okay? Africans are not slaves. They were enslaved Africans. Okay? And so they were used instrumentally, and it was no surprise that they were used for such because of the fact that they were people who could do hard work. The Europeans who came out here couldn't do it. The Caribs, they tried first to get them to work for them. They couldn't do it. But the Africans had the strength, they had the resilience, they had skills. And they used those to their advantage, the British, to build fortresses and other, what we now call monuments, on their behalf. So in the case of Brimstone Hill, you had the people called the Royal Engineers. They were the ones who did the design and the layout of the fortress. And the design ensured that it had a certain purpose, which was warfare, defense. But the actual construction was done by the enslaved Africans. They cut every single stone you see at Brimstone Hill, and it's not 1,000 stones. It's millions of stones. They cut every stone. And it might be interesting to note that to cut a stone took somewhere between a half to a full day to cut one stone, because it was all done manually. No machines, manual chipping and chipping to get it that fine, beautiful surface that you see, and what is at the back, which you don't see. And so over about a period of 100 years, that construction took place, putting together all of those stones to make what eventually became an impregnable fortress, one that is not only built to be impregnable, but also impressive. So there are elements of design that and beauty that are encapsulated in its construction, but there's also the functionality. And I just finished a tour with some students and staff from the Clarence Fitzroy Bryan College, and they were amazed at some of the things that they were being exposed to at Brimstone Hill. It's a very complex monument, and one that is of interest not just locally, but also internationally, because it had repercussions throughout the Caribbean and throughout Europe and the Americas.
Yes, right. So, repercussions, that word, repercussions, and museums are places that remind us of those repercussions.
Museum reminds us a lot about a lot of things. I have visited museum in several countries where we still have a very big stronghold of the colonial, and those museums, when I visit them, they tend to cover up the story and the narratives. And we have been in discussion through a grouping that into the International National Trust Organization had formed after the last conference they had online last year. And they realized that a lot of museums, not only in the Americas and in Europe, that they cover up the story. And they have been trying to get them to open up the story. So you would not go into a museum in Europe and see a shackle. You would not. And if you go into a room, the shackle alone will be in that room, and they will put almost similar to enter at your own risk because they don't want to offend their visitors. And now they're saying that, you know, you need to stop it. You need to start to tell the true story of what it was. You need to stop covering it up. And we are asked in St. Kitts, how do you tell your story? And I'm like, free for all. We have no reason to cover it up. We are the ones who suffered, so we want that story being told. And museums tell a lot of stories, a lot of stories, and they're very emotional stories, no matter what the story is. And I'll give you an example. When we mounted that special exhibition that marked the 50th anniversary for the Christina disaster, 50 years later, and people stood in the room and cried because they lost somebody. So even at that, 50 years later, you're still feeling the emotions. When we put an exhibition, when we put the 200-year-old register of the enslaved people on display and the whole story behind it, man, we put out everything that slave would have encountered coming to St. Kitts. The story was out there, and visitors came and they cried in the room, just imagining what, you know, these people went. And you're not talking just the Africans, you're talking about people from different backgrounds who come because they know the story. So museums tell some serious stories, and we need to, as locals, come and learn the story and appreciate it. And, you know, I said to people all the time, as much as we don't like the fact that we had slavery, and our people came from Africa and they were enslaved, what they left for us, the legacies they left for us are enormous. And as Mr. Hanley alluded to, ain't nobody else could have done it. Even they brought Europeans here. They had British slavery. They brought slaves here who were white people, but they couldn't do the work. They really couldn't do the work. And so they had to find somebody, especially when they begin into the sugar industry, they couldn't do the work. So they had to find people to do the work. And our people were resilient. We were strong, resilient, smart, educated, skills. I mean, you had somebody pointed out the other day, when you visit Brimstone Hill and you go down, I think it's the captain's quarters where they have these arches. And yeah, the officers' quarters. And Kitishan Hill tried to build the same thing if you go up there, but it doesn't look nothing like it. And yes, and somebody pointed out, look at that, modern engineers, and they can't get the arch curve as our enslaved forefathers and those people did with hand tools, not machines, tools, hand. you know. And when you look at the chimneys that they built, that went however much high, and they didn't have scaffolding, they didn't have all of these machines we have now, but they did it, and those are our legacy. And it is a legacy that we must appreciate. So we cannot, as Kittitians and Nivisions, continue to destroy those legacies by stealing the stones, destroying them, knocking down entire structures, to take the stones, to go and build buildings. And I want to appeal to those architects and engineers here in St. Kitts. When you design a building that requires face stones, make sure they know where the stones are coming from. Because people are taking backhoes and knocking down entire structures. And that is destroying our legacy. That is destroying our history. We can no longer tell it because there's no evidence to tell it. How can we appreciate how our people work so hard to create this, that you know, we can't show it no longer? That cannot continue. And you know, our history is important. We are here to preserve it. We are here to protect it. And we need the support of everybody. So people can't come and say, oh my, well, you know, those things are not accepted. And we need to be able to protect what we have. And as we alluded to earlier, build on it. Build on it. We can't build on something if it's not there.
Yeah, you mentioned an extremely important point, Willis, and perhaps Janelle can pick up on it. And it has to do with cultural and historical erasure. Because sometimes we probably do not understand what we are doing. And sometimes we are wiping out our history and wiping out our culture and not preserving it, not conserving it. And it's the treasure of a lifetime that we are destroying.
Indeed, because again, at the Museum of Nevis History, what we do, we promote it as a gateway towards Nevis as a living museum. So as you go through our museum, at the exit, you will have a map of Nevis showcasing all of our primary historical sites. And when you get to those sites, you have historical background information on them as well. So when you get to sites now, like Willis just indicated, and you have individuals who would have gone to the sites and stolen the stones to go and make a pretty fence or a nice house, now you're destroying that aspect of the museum, Nevis as a living museum. That history that someone came to learn from, to see, to witness, to understand how this came to be, is now erased. Is this actually a thing? In Nevis recently, you would have had like there's an alleyway where it's believed that it was the slave wall, like that was the market, the pathway that led towards the slave market. And that wall was recently destroyed. And something like that, right now the individuals living there, we know what it was, but in the next 10 years, our kids won't. They will never know that's what was there. We now have to preserve that history in a place like our museum to be able to transmit that. Whereas if you left the physical structure, that in itself could be a reminder, not for negative purposes, but to understand, to know. Because all aspects of our history is important. The difficult aspects, the pleasant aspects, when we think that we came from kings and queens of the Ashanti kingdoms, that's important. And it's also important to know that our ancestors were stolen and brought here as hostages to work. They weren't slaves, but they were hostages forced to survive in that situation. And it's important to know how you came to be.
Yeah, recently we've seen a sort of a new phenomena where statues, you know, erected and monuments erected and so on, and people want them demolished. They want them demolished because as far as they are concerned, they do not remind us or do not remind them of anything pleasant that these people did. And so you see them dragging them down in the US and so on. Wouldn't you say that that is a part of erasing the culture?
My personal opinion on that is I wouldn't propose destroying certain statues, but I would propose putting them in a place where the accurate and comprehensive story is told about this person that was celebrated as a hero during this time, but these are the atrocities that we can recognize now that they would have committed. And while at the time it might have been seen and celebrated, now with a conscious mind we can look and say, no, this individual is not one who should be mounted in front of a central square to be celebrated, but in this museum sphere, it's important to tell that story and not erase it completely. You just have to change the narration to make it more accurate and comprehensive.
The narrative in museums and telling the story is important. You can't change it. You can't change it. You can't go and say, oh, Brimstone Hill is there and it was built by the enslaved, but really and truly they willingly did it. They willingly did it. You know, some people would tell that story. And we had a challenge with a particular entity that came into St. Kitts, and they tried in their business setting to incorporate the history of St. Kitts within the setting that they're presenting. And I was actually in Bermuda attending a conference when somebody, one of the presenters, brought up this entity in St. Kitts and telling this, they showed a portion of the story that they have in the business. And they're like, can you imagine? They're telling this thing wrong. So when I see it, I went up my phone immediately. I said to my then museum manager, can you go over there and tell him to take this thing down? Now I'm in a foreign country, but this person is telling the story that we cannot have people coming here and trying to change the narrative, right? And that's what they're doing. They come and they're saying, this is what happened. So you have, oh, this is the great house, and this is where the slaves and the enslaved people and the masters hang out. No, they did not do that. That did not happen. You can't say that. And you can't say that because you want to encourage people to come here. That's not the truth. And those are the things we're talking about. If you're going to tell the story, you need to tell it honestly. And I agree with Janelle. We can have certain things in certain places that have no bearing on us as a people, right? So you have a statue of John Jones. Why did the statue there? Oh, in those days they thought he was somebody important, so they put up a statue of him. Well, what was his importance? What is his claim to fame? How did he impact the country? If you can't answer those things, then I can't see the reason why that should be there. But then again, too, you put the statue somewhere else, and you said this statue was erected here and there, and this is why it was erected. But Tom Jones really was a slave master, and, you know, he did all of these things. So we need to tell the story. It is important in museums that the honest to God true story is told. We may not like it, but it has to be told in all honesty. You can't change it up because it sounds good and you want to encourage other people. The story is a story. Now, if you don't really want to tell a story, then don't put it up. But as long as you put the information there, it has to be accurate. It has to be accurate, right? So you can change that narrative. It is important. That is as important as we could get when it comes to telling the story. And I'll give you a little joke. So we have an exhibition, a special exhibition right now in the museum. And part of the story is something that a lot of people don't know about the particular individual, which is the museum, the exhibit on the Sir Kennedy Simmons' life. And today, when the students came out the room, I said, which was your favorite room that you went in? And they said, oh, the Sir Kennedy one. And I said, well, what do you remember about him? And they bust out something really personal that a lot of people don't know, and I couldn't catch myself. And I'm like, that is something that a lot of people don't really know about Sir Ken. But it's in there, and he approved of it being there because it is part of his life. Yes. So we can't take it out and say, oh, you know, it ain't part of his, you know, nobody really need to know. Once you're telling a story, you can't leave anything out, right? So it is what it is. You have to put it in. How you put it in is important. How you present it is important, but it has to be there. And that's important in telling stories.
history. They separate it into two words. His story. And that is important because experience has shown that history is told according to who's telling the story. And each person tells that story based on their own particular bias and their particular exposure. Somebody will tell you the same story from a different angle because they had a different perspective. So history is told by who's telling the story. And this is why I agree with the two ladies in terms of the importance of ensuring that history is told as accurately as possible. Yes. Not with a particular bias, but accurately. And then people have the chance now to put whatever interpretation they wish to it, but the interpretation will be based along the lines of the facts and not along the lines of what they think they should tell or what they should not tell.
Right. So we are dealing here with two things. The one who is telling the story, telling it, as you said, Mr. Hanley, from their perspective or their bias or from their experience. And on the other hand, you have the person who is interpreting the story, because we also interpret according to our own experiences and our own biases. And so you have two things happening: the storyteller and the person who is actually interpreting that story, because that story can have many interpretations based on who is interpreting the story. Now, the International Council of Museums, do we have any representation on it?
The National Trust may be an associate member, but I know for a fact that we are part of the other Council for Museums, which is like ICOMOS, but I think they're related. So we're on the regional one, and they're on the international one, if that's correct. So we are a member of the Regional Museum Association, and they, I think, is a member of ICOMOS. Okay. But we are a member of the International National Trust Organization, which is based in England. Right.
Okay, right. So if we want to preserve both our tangible heritage, our tangible culture, and also the intangible. Sometimes we don't speak so much about the intangible, which is just as important as the tangible, because it is the intangible, my understanding, that gives rise to the tangible. Okay?
The Ministry of Culture has just finished a project to preserve the intangible cultural heritage in both St. Kitts and Nevis, and that was a project funded by UNESCO. And so through that project, they would have captured the preservation of speeches, actions, dances, those type of things. How you make a yard boom, or even that is that they're trying to preserve, and different other aspects of our intangible heritage. So that part of our culture is controlled a lot by the Ministry of the Department of Culture. A similar program was done before by the National Trust a couple of years ago as well. So we capture that, and we also go out and do face-to-face interviews with persons, and we capture those information. We do them digitally, so it's you sit with somebody and you have a conversation about a particular thing, and you capture that, and that is part of preserving the intangible. They're telling you how it used to be done, and you try to preserve it so that when you're ready to tell the story about it, you would have had that, information in order to share as to how it was done, how we used to do things then. So intangible cultural heritage is important. It's coming from more of the Department of Culture than the St. Christopher National Trust. But that information is also shared. It's stored in the archives at the National Trust. And I want to elaborate a little bit here. Our entire history cannot be found on Google. A lot of people, they want to know something about St. Kitts, what happened in St. Kitts, anything about St. Kitts, and they go on Google. It's not on Google. Our information are in our archives, tangible. It's just this morning when the teachers came and they're like, can we get all of this information you have in here? No, you need to come to the archive, sit down, do your research, and gather the information for your, as I say, my social studies class, and we don't have know all of this happening, and we didn't know this, and we didn't know that. And we Google it. It's not on Google. So we have archives at the National Museum building where you could come and research anything about St. Kitts, you'll find it there. Anything about St. Kitts, you'll find it there. People, even when Janelle visited today, she's like, where you find all the information? I'm like, downstairs. I did say
Right. It's
Actually,
good, but
I was impressed at how they were able to put the information together so nicely. Like, I know it exists, but I'm also aware of the dedication and that an individual has to be dedicated for hours to be able to pull the story from a cross-section of materials. But to piggyback on your question about intangible cultural heritage, since we're talking about International Museums Day, as part of our celebrations tomorrow, we've invited a number of primary schools to the museum ground in Nevis, where we'll be entertaining them and teaching them a number of traditional games that we used to play as children ourselves. And that is a critical aspect of intangible culture that I find is not being effectively passed down currently. I took the game of jacks to my third form class when I was teaching recently, and they had no idea how to play, how to even throw and catch the ball, no eye coordination, nothing. So tomorrow will be dedicated to games such as dog and bone, jacks, Mississippi, plum in the middle, and that way the older ones among us will be transmitting it to the children who can go back to school and also share it and help to preserve that aspect of intangible culture.
We did an exhibition on that a couple of years ago. The games we played, it was called, and we had all of those things. And the kids were amazed that they could have come to the museum and play these games, you know, hopscotch, skip rope, the go-kart. We had a go-kart made from, you know, we had those things you steered made from coconut branch. You know, all of those things that we've lost. That, again, we've lost on it because our children now are more interested in the technology, and they're not interested in being outside and playing rounders. I sure if you say rounders, ain't a soul child know what you're talking about. And playing cricket. Anywhere you find anything that could hit a ball, you know, where you play telephone with the string and the pans, and you know, all of those things we had on display when we did the exhibit of the games we played a couple of years ago. So we continue as a museum, as
Okay.
our function to educate our people on our history.
right, the education component. Mr. Hanley, I would like you to speak a little bit to the power of community building through education. You know, that relationship between community building and education on our history. I know it's in our museums. I know there are museums at Brimstone Hill that try to tell the story and so on.
Yes, well, it is extremely important that museums, our National Museum, the one in Nevis, the ones at Brimstone Hill, and many people do not know that we have museum rooms at Brimstone Hill. If you take the time to come to Brimstone Hill and look around, at the top of the fort, where the citadel is located, we have rooms that are dedicated to the interpretation and recording of part of the history of St. Kitts and Nevis as it pertains to Brimstone Hill and about the history of Brimstone Hill. And we expect that that not only educates the visitors, but also would filter down to the locals especially. They have the first option. And part of the intention and operational guidelines of Brimstone Hill Society is to ensure that we include the society in what we do. And so we have programs that try to incorporate the local communities. In fact, the people that we hire at Brimstone Hill, we ensure that they come from the surrounding communities. You won't find people employed there who come from Basse-Terre and so on. You'll find there people mostly from Sandy Point, Old Road, Fairchilds, and those areas, the areas surrounding Brimstone Hill. And we also have what we call community outreach programs, which are designed to ensure that we involve the community in what we do. So for example, some of the typical ones that we can mention, we have during the month of February, when we celebrate Black History Month, we consider it as History and Heritage Month. So in other words, we're not just focusing on the black part of it, but history and heritage, period. And we have programs that are designed to involve the community in that. We have a number of events that take place. We also have during August, when we celebrate emancipation, we have a program called Emancipation Festival, where again we invite local artists, nothing foreign, local artists, local groups, local dancers, local singers, poetry makers, and so on, to come and demonstrate their talent at the Hill. And of course we invite an audience, and that audience will learn and be entertained by them. We also have during Independence time a race from the bottom of the hill to the top that we call the Brimstone Hill Run for the Fit and the Fearless. I'm sure Mr. Williams has done it already, you know, because he looks to me like he's fit and fearless. And so, but if you haven't, then you have a chance to do it next time we're doing it. So these are events that we have in order to involve the community. And it's important that the community be involved in these things because they have to learn to appreciate what they have. Because it's not my property, my responsibility, it's our. Brimstone Hill belongs to us. St. Kitts belongs to us. But you'll find that many visitors come here and appreciate it more than our locals do. But I would like to invite our locals to become familiar with what we have and be a part of what we have and to protect what we have. Sometimes when I walk around and I see how people wantonly dispose of garbage throughout the Federation, I sometimes say this is because they don't have an appreciation for what we have. And I think that if we are able to bring that information to the individual personally and that they adopt it personally, then they will have a better role to play in the overall picture of the community and the state.
Yes, Mr. Hanley, I think you're very accurate in terms of how all of this can shape an informed and engaged civil society. And that is what the education on our history and our culture is all about. We want people who are engaged, we want people who are informed in our civil society. Now, the benefits of museums to a country. There are many benefits, I suppose, that museums have to a country. Let us list some of them.
We can look at the benefits of museums to a country in a number of categories. You can look at, let's go with the most basic that people somehow like to focus on, financial, because a lot of people might say, well, what's the point of a museum? It's not making any money. But contrary to popular belief, the museums do draw in some income, particularly from external visitors, because there's a whole international body of individuals who are interested in learning about different cultures and just appreciating the islands and countries that they're going to.
So it's about the social economy, not just about the financial economy.
Yes, but
it's about the social economy.
So you have a whole, you have all of it is linked. So that financial profit now that we can make from the museum, let's just go that route for a second, that now through the Nevis Historical and Conservation Society, because we're non-profit, is transmitted into the community through different projects that we're doing. Cultural projects, environmental projects, historical conservation and restoration projects. So if we want to talk about benefits, that's one. Now if we go to the main benefit to me is to preserve, protect, and promote the culture of the country or island that the museum is in. And that in itself, even if it was no cost, no charge, and you were operating at a loss, that would be valuable enough to continue the task of just having a museum so that you can teach the younger generation what was, how we came to be this way, the path that your ancestors took to get here, and how that is related to the global world, not just your small pea in the ocean. So I'll let my counterparts add some other benefits because I could keep going.
Right, and we can also think in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. You know, scientific information. We're disseminating scientific information on environmental challenges even and things like that. And part of the quality education. Because a quality education must ground us in our history and our culture.
And one of the things, that's why that been crying out, because when you have people visit the museum, they often say, I never learned that in school. For too long we were telling the colonial part of our history and not the local portion of our history. That is now slowly changing, and that is something we applaud and appreciate, that the education unit realize that it is important for our youngsters to know the history. The National Trust, I'm not sure how much it leans to with the NHCS, but we are heavily also involved in our environmental aspect of our history. We are on every committee that pops up that's like environment, climate change, you know, all of those things, and the impact of it. Because once it's considered a heritage thing, the National Trust automatically falls into that sphere of it. And so the sustainable goals are important for us to keep a focus on when we are planning programs, when we are looking at how we're going to promote. We want to keep that as a focus there. And so it's important for us to you know what they're looking at and how we fit in order to achieve our own personal objectives. But I totally agree with Janelle. The first thing is the economic value of museums. The National Museum of St. Kitts on a good year, we make a lot of money from visitors that comes into our show. And then, like she said, we can now put it into the economy in terms of programs. And, you know, you want to throw a program, you want to have something where you could educate the children. But, you know, if we don't have the funds to do it, then it can't be done. And those exhibitions we put on at the museum, those exhibitions that people come and see, they cost a pretty penny. They cost a pretty penny. So let us not be aware that, you know, we don't need the financial support from everyone. The last 2 exhibits we put up won us between $20,000 to $25,000 EC dollars to mount each. So they're not cheap, and I'm sure Janelle will attest to that. They're really of high standards. They're very of high standards. And so that is what we are trying to do, to raise the standard of the National Museum. We want to be very competitive to, you know, what is out there. You're going to a museum, you want it to be interactive one way, but you want it to be able to tell the story. Not all digital. We don't want you to have to come and do a screen, but, you know, to advance. If you know, you see something, but you want to know more, you have the other aspect of it. So it is important. The sustainable goals is important. We focus on them when we develop our programs and plans and executing them into the community.
Yes. And knowing our history, preserving our history, our culture, can give us a very strong sense of justice and peace as well. And basically how we can even have very strong institutions. Institutions built on justice, especially understanding where we are coming from, how we were treated, the inequalities that abounded in our history and so on, can make us a better people. I think it is in our constitution even that is one of our fundamental rights, never to be enslaved. And that has come out of the fact that for so many years, period of enslavement on the sugar plantation, you know. So that strong sense of justice coming out of our history, I think, if our history is properly taught, you know, can be something of, you know, that we have. Now, you mentioned something, Willis, in terms of digitalization and accessibility. Because in this modern day and age, how are you using the technology in your museums to reach more people?
Well, we've just started. Like I said, we had a permanent exhibition up that tells the entire story of the country's history that we took down as part of the plan to modernize it. But that what we had up, we are actually in the process of digitizing it. So you could do you should be able to do a virtual tour of the museum as it was before we now going to modernize it. And that also is part of preserving the history, because we had up these big wooden boards that if you didn't look where you're going, you'll bust your toe, and you had to stand and read because the papers were 8.5 by 11 that tell the whole story of one particular event on an 8.5 by 11 paper. And so you had to be up close reading. Also, you thought about accessibility. If you are challenged, if we have guests who are in wheelchairs or anything like that, they can't visit the museum. So we're actually part of the restoration process that we're putting in a lift that you can come up to the museum, and you're no longer, you know, having this, because we have a lot of people who come visit us and they have somebody who part of the group in a wheelchair, and they have to leave them downstairs, and they come up and they enjoy the whole thing, and you know, the other person have to hear all about it. So we can't have that anymore. If we are going to be a modern museum, everything must be, you know, be able to reach everybody. So you're going to have a section where kids can be interactive if they come. So it's no longer a turn off for them, or they come.
Engaging.
Yes. And then you have the history that you know, it would enlighten the elder persons who say, yeah, I remember this, or yeah, I remember when we used to do this, and when it was like this, and when it was like that. And
not
appreciate
even that. Sometimes, you know, to help people to understand very complex and nuanced concepts. You know, to put it in such a way to help people to understand.
Yes,
So
definitely.
you asked about digitization, and we have attempted to incorporate that into our museum at the Museum of Nevis History. When they redeveloped the display in 2020, augmented reality was introduced. Unfortunately, HP would have discontinued their program, so that aspect is temporarily down. But we also have QR codes on a lot of our displays. So when you get to the section on culture now, and you're reading about the string band music, and you're reading about the different dialect words, there's a QR code there where you can scan it, and it takes you to maybe a YouTube link where you can actually see it live in action happening. So aspects like that is how we work to digitize on a budget, but it's effective. And we've also recently introduced an in-house production at our museum October last year, I believe, was the first production. It's monthly, where myself, I would interview different individuals associated with the society. So it's called DEMSE, because, you know, locally, somebody always say, DEMSE Expert Perspective, and we have conversations about their field of expertise, historical sites, culture, archives, and then we put it out on social media, our website, YouTube, so that individuals can access and learn about our museums that way.
Right. We are going to go to the phone lines, and the numbers to call are 466-2666. That is 466-2666, 662-8674, 662-8674, 767-4765, 767-4765, and the overseas number is 1-239-645-4500. That is 1-239-645-4500. We welcome your calls. Right, Mr. Hanley, at Brimstone Hill, how is the technology? What role is the technology playing to help people to understand the history better? Because that is important. You know, we have to use the technology now.
Yeah, but unfortunately, technology also costs a lot of money. And so you find that we may resort to more conventional methods in the meantime while we are trying to get engaged with the implementation of new technology. For example, one of the things we are thinking about at Brimstone Hill, and you'd have heard Willie speak about at the museum, people who can't manage the stairs. Brimstone Hill has a very formidable staircase. It's only 27 steps actually, but it's one of the most, how should I say, physically engaging 27 steps that you'll probably ever do. As a result, you would have people who are differently abled, who are unable to maneuver those steps. We have been conscious of that for a long time. We have had some folks who have come here from Parks Canada to look at the situation and determine how best we can accommodate those kind of people.
Okay, Mr. Hanley, stick a pin there. Working for you, good afternoon. Hello, working for you, good afternoon. Are you there, caller? Working for you, good afternoon. Not hearing anyone. Working for you, good afternoon. Okay. Caller, please feel free to call back. Right,
Yes,
Mr. Hanley, yes.
So as I was saying, these folks try to look at how we can get access to those persons, so introduce some kind of lift or something like that. But unfortunately, because of the nature of Brimstone Hill, those are difficult things to implement without damaging the original fabric of the structure or structures, and those are against the principles of UNESCO. And so we have to be careful with that. However, we've thought of another alternative. On one of my trips overseas to a UNESCO event, I saw some folks demonstrating a three-dimensional experience where they can put in 3D an experience of an actual situation. They put on these goggles and you're right there, okay? And so we've thought of incorporating something like that, where for those people who can't make it to the top, create a 3D experience where they can literally stay in one place and do a tour of the areas that are inaccessible to them under their circumstances. But that will involve quite a bit of money.
Yes.
So it's something we are considering, but it will take time and money. There are other aspects in terms of the record keeping, you know, digitizing, as we said. We have some of our documents and records digitized. And again, that's another time-consuming
Yes,
situation.
we have a caller again, Mr. Hanley. Let's hope it comes through this time. Working for you, good afternoon. Working for you, good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Hello?
Yes, we are hearing you.
Hello?
Hello, we are hearing you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Hello? We seem to be having some. Are you hearing me? We seem to be experiencing some difficulty there with the calls. Okay, Mr. Hanley, let's continue.
Okay, well, I was just about finished there, but trying to modernize. But at the same time, you have to remember that a historical site is that. And there's two key words that UNESCO always likes to bring to the attention, especially of historical sites that are under the aegis of the World Heritage designation: authenticity and integrity. In other words, you must preserve, that's important, to preserve the authenticity and integrity of the site as it was originally. And so using too many modern methods, for example, even in renovation and reconstruction. The other day we had a wall that collapsed under, you know, over time, and also because of hydrological pressure and other forces like earthquakes that exacerbated the problem. And that wall collapsed. We had to rebuild that wall in order to preserve the integrity and structure of the area. But we could not use modern materials. We had to use the original stone that was in that structure. We can't bring any from anywhere else. We had to use the original mortar techniques, not the modern cement. That's totally unacceptable. We had to use the original lime and make the mortar out of that to reconstruct that wall in the same pattern and the original structural design that it was originally, in order for it to be accepted by UNESCO.
Yes.
And so there's a situation where we have to recognize the things that has to be kept the way it is, and where modern intervention can assist.
You know, there are many people who travel. Once ago, the focus was on just the sun, sea, and sand, the three S's. But, well, I don't want to go into the fourth one. That also is tourism, but we're not marketing that in this program. But the heritage tourism is very, very important. And nowadays you have people who are traveling because they want actually to know about the culture, the heritage of countries. They want to actually see the things themselves. They want to go to the museums and so on. And more, we are getting that sort of tourism. People interested in that.
It is something that the islands have been looking at over the last 5 years, 4 or 5 years. We have had programs sponsored or supported by the OAS who have tried to engage the countries, the CARICOM countries, to begin to divest or divert our tourism product into heritage tourism. And so even now, there's a program that is being sponsored or push by the OECS that is called the RIDE program, and it comes with 3 components. One of them is the heritage tourism component. One is about the developing, you know, capacity and they're working with all the national trusts from the OECS countries. And so they're delving into it. And I guided them the other day and I said, you know, you're coming in, but we've had several other programs such as these that were sponsored by, you know, other agencies out there who realize that we are unique in our own way. Same but unique. All of us have a history, same but unique. And so we need to be able to use that uniqueness and market ourselves to, you know, the wider community. And the National Trust is also working in tangent with the, our Tourism Authority and the Ministry of Tourism to begin to create the spaces for that we can now have a real heritage tourism component. It is something I'm hoping that by the 2024 tourism season, that we will have more than one site that people can visit. The first one we're focusing on is the Charles Fort site, which is the fort that preceded the Brimstone Hill. A lot of people don't even know of this fort, but when we take people there and they see what's there, they're like, wow. It's not as impressive as Brimstone Hill, but it is impressive in its own right. And unlike Nevis, who lost theirs, we are happy that our walls are still standing, these fort walls, which are about 4 to 6 feet thick. The other day I said to somebody that, you know, I want to open the site that communities can now begin to use the site. And they said, well, you know, nothing could pass through the gate, you know. So if they have to bring tent, they're going to lodge them through the gate because you can't drive through the gate, you can't drive through the gate. It's a real fort. And so we have that. We have started restoration work on the cotton ginnery. And hopefully we can have that finished again for that. So we will be able to push a couple of our sites out there in tangent with the Tourism Authority who wants to sell the destination. And now we have a heritage component. There's a lot of people who come. They tell you they're not interested in going to see the sun, they're not going on the beach, they want to visit. What is the other thing we need to do also in St. Kitts is to have museum of various kinds.
Working for you, good afternoon.
Hello?
Yes, working for you. Go ahead, Willis.
So one of the things I've been advocating for is spaces that we can have several different kinds of museum. We should have a sports museum. I've been working on having a cultural and arts museum. And, you know, there are other things out there that we could tell a story that doesn't fit into the National Museum, but it needs to be expounded on, so to speak. So those, you know, we need to find spaces that can, you know, do those things. And Janet have the same challenge because I'm saying to her, you know, we did this Christina exhibition and we want to share it with Nevis for a while. And she's challenging finding a space to put it, right? So we're having, you know, those are things where we can begin to delve or transform into a heritage tourism society where people can come and appreciate, you know, what we have and visit the different museums, visit the different sites, learn the history. And somebody came up with the idea that we need to have a place where you can go and not only learn the history, but you could learn how we make this and how we make that and how to dance the what you call that thing, the masquerade dance, you know, and, you know, dance the clown dance and, you know, appreciate our history, what we're selling. And so a lot of people would be interested in that. And so we need to really change the way we see our heritage, not only that it is there to be told, but there to be shared, and a marketing tool for our country.
Yes, yes, right. Now, what is in our museums? What is in it?
Okay, I can begin.
What is in them?
Our museum is small, as I indicated. So as you step into our Museum of Nevis History, you will first get some background information on the society, of course. And then you will see a lovely timeline information board. It's a display that tells the story of what is happening in Africa prior to European colonization, what is happening in Europe, what was happening in the Caribbean here in Nevis at the time. And you get to follow the whole timeline, color-coded as well, so it's very easy to follow. And you see how these situations would have intertwined and what was happening at different aspects. You have aspects in our museum that talks about the Amerindians who were here on Nevis because they were here prior to the Europeans and the Africans, and they're an important part of our culture as well as a display on the whole sugar industry from enslavement and how to manufacture sugar, the boiling pot, to our modern day culture, music, art, language, batik, the stringman instrument, some of our former queens. It's just a comprehensive insight of snapshot of Nevisian history and culture. Then if you transition across the way, that's in our separate museum within the same yard. That is what we call the Alexander Hamilton Museum, formerly known as the Trot House, because Alexander Hamilton, he's on the US $10 bill. You know, he's a fairly big attraction for North American guests. So, and he was a son of the soil of Nevis, and we recognize all of our sons of the soil, regardless of race. And he did make a significant impact in the world, and you have an exhibit there which tells the story of his life from leaving to Nevis to his journey in the US and his work in education and his work in the war and creating the financial infrastructure of the United States. So you have all of that happening in those two museums. As I said, the Maritime Museum is still under construction and design, so that one is to come.
The National Museum of St. Kitts is vast. We have 4 large rooms that tells the entire story. And we start out with we also have a display on our environmental aspect. The sea part of it, the land part of it. Before we go into colonization, the history of sugar, indentureship, independence, culture and arts, you know, anything about St. Kitts is the storyline, same thing, storyline. But we have a bigger space, so we have a bigger exhibition. But we have 2 rooms that we use what we call special exhibits. Like I say, we pick an event and we do an exhibition on it. And we've done many over the years, about 8 of them since I've been there. And so those are where we pick an event. We had the migration. That was a really big thing for me to understand where our people going. And if people realize our population has not changed since the 1930s or 40s, the figure stays the same. St. Kitts people just migrate. And they have been migrating from way back. It's almost like they feel like it's better out there. That's the story we got when we did the research. We did an exhibition on our money and our trading, monies from way back when. And the National Museum of St. Kitts owns a coin collection that they purchased for thousands and thousands of dollars, sitting in a bank somewhere, you know, being protected. And so we've done those type of exhibition, and it's important for us to share that information with people. Like I said, we did the games we played, we did the Cleghorn journals. The Cleghorn journals was the journals that after we had emancipation, they had what the government of the day implemented what they call special magistrates. And this guy, Mr. Cleghorn, was a local. And they thought that if they made him a magistrate, he would not be advocating so much on behalf of the locals, the just recently freed slave persons. And so they made him a magistrate, and he kept journals of all the cases he tried. And so we were able to put those journals on display. You could have come and read the stories of the cases he tried locally in St. Kitts. And so those are things that we would have put out there. And there would be exhibit that is only up for a couple of months and then we'll take them down because they're only temporary. But the museum at the National Museum of St. Kitts is a very big space that tell a large story about the entire history of St. Kitts. And like I say, it's not just about what happened, we also look at the environmental aspect of our history. We had a whole board that talk about the lionfish. Lionfish is not indigenous to St. Kitts, so we had to tell the story as to why they came here and, you know, the damage they do and why we need to catch them and eat them fast, you know. So those are things that the museum have. But
Okay.
in truth and in fact, our museum tells the story of the country. Events, people, places, things, it tells the story. Anybody visit the museum, I tell visitors all the time, if you can't go around the island, come into the museum. Whatever you want to know about St. Kitts, you will learn it right there. And so once you've been there, you really, the only thing you want to do is to go and see for yourself. If the structures are there, if what we say is so, and you know you want to visit those places. And again, like Daniel said, we can't have people destroying the places because
Right.
then we look as if we're not telling the truth. If we say, yeah, you know, there's this site there that this particular thing happened. If you go, you will see this, that, and that. And then when you get there, you're not seeing this or that,
Right.
you know.
We're almost out of time. Mr. Hanley, what can we expect at Brimstone Hill in terms of what is there?
Well, first of all, I like the term that Ms. Nisbet used earlier, where she talked about a living museum. And Brimstone Hill is a great example of that, because the whole park itself is the museum. Its structures and all the things related to it, even its geology, start from the geology of how it was made, it's all there to be seen. And visiting the hill is visiting a museum. But of course, within that museum, we have museum rooms that go on to give you further interpretation and presentation of some of these details. And for those who are unable to visually interpret what they're seeing, the museum does that. Prior to going to the museum, you have a video that also gives you an introductory recognition of some of the things that pertain to the hill. But in the rooms, we have artifacts, we have pictures, we have stuff that tells the story and gives you a sort of hands-on interpretation of exactly what, not only of the history part, but even the modern developments. For example, you go there and you will see recent things that may have happened. And having said that, I'll mention something particular that I know a lot of Kittitians, especially in the more recent generations, aren't aware of, is that there was an event at Brimstone Hill in the 1950s. It was actually 1950. Easter Monday. Brimstone Hill was a place where people gathered together on holidays like Easter Monday for big party events. There'll be bands playing, there'll be dancing, there'll be eating, drinking, and so on and so on. And there was this particular Easter Monday, and I think it happened to have been the last. There was this big event there, and people gathered at the top, the Citadel, inside of the Citadel compound, having a great time, and all of a sudden it rained. And I think we know what rain means to Kittitians. It means run.
And there was a stampede.
They ran, and there was a stampede, and people got killed. I think something like about 10 persons died, including children, who were unable to get out of the way of the stampeding crowd. And so even things, this you can call this fairly modern, but we transition the history from the old situation to modern, and even some of the more recent visits, like the visits of Prince Harry recently and Prince Charles, and other events like that. And so it's a developing story, and it's not only the actual museum displays, but the fact that it in itself is a living museum.
Yes, okay. Well, we are out of time. And I know that we can go on and we can have such a rich discussion here in terms of our history and our culture, our museums, which are very important. Perhaps we don't have enough. I would like to perhaps see a sugar museum, where, that really tells our history of sugar.
We're working on it.
That is extremely important for over 400 years. We were basically a sugar economy.
We have the living museum there that we are allowing to destroy itself.
At the sugar factory there.
That
The
could
National
actually be the
Museum
best
is
place to
working
tell
on
that
it.
story.
Yes.
We're working on it.
Right. And where basically would we like to see our museums in the future?
Yes.
1 minute. Where would you like to see them?
Well, I definitely sanctioning that sugar museum, and it is a fight that the National Trust have been having since the close of the sugar industry, and so it is a slow process, but we're getting there, and hopefully within the next 5 years we should have a sugar museum. So we are fighting to protect that site and to preserve it and to be able to restore it, to tell the story of the entire sugar industry. But what we want to see is, for us at the National Trust, is a modern museum that can capture the attention of all audiences and be able to tell the story in a manner that is engaging. That for me is thing. And like I said, we also want to have more than one museum where we can tell different aspects of our history in a more detailed manner, and so that for me is important. There are a lot of other avenues that we're looking at where we could develop museums, and those will be expounded on as time goes by.
Janet, just 1 minute.
I got you. So where we'd like to see our museum is to incorporate a bit more technology into it to be able to effectively tell the story in our museum space, as well as develop a space where we can do more temporary exhibitions that are relevant to the time. And we would love to expound on Nevis as a living museum, so to expand on the information at the different sites and how individuals can interact when they go from site to site. That's what we are looking towards in Nevis for our museum.
Good. Right. So thank you very much to all three of you. Mr. Percival Hanwy, the General Manager of the Brimstone Hill Fortress National Park Society. Thank you very much. Willis. This is Willis Goddard, Executive Director of the St. Christopher National Trust, and Ms. Janelle Nisbet, the Director of the Nevis Historical and Conservation Society. Thank you to all three of you for coming today and sharing with us on International Museum Day. Today, May the 18th. Our museums are extremely important for intergenerational dialogue. Generations, the dialogue must continue between generations, and that is extremely important. I want to thank all of our listeners to today's program. There were some persons who were trying to call in, and I want to apologize. There was some technical issue here at ZIZ, and we were not able to get your calls, and we do apologize for that. Next week, we will be back with another edition of Working for You. Until then, I am Les Roy Williams. Take good care.
Yeah, folks, another edition of Working for You here on FM 98.9. We now head back to our regular program, and don't forget that 4:30 we will bring in the People's Action Movement press conference, launch of Constituency 8 candidate.
Found the sound.